Hi, we're Nia and Marianne from Seren Health Coaching. We are metabolic health coaches who are passionate about good metabolic health for everyone. We also love to chat about all things health and to share as much information as we can with people who want to make changes to their lifestyle but aren't quite sure where to start. We're going to release a new episode every Friday where we talk about a different aspect of health. So do subscribe and let us know what you think. We'd also love to know what you're interested in too. So if there's something that you'd like us to have a chat about, do send us a message and we'll do our best to cover it soon.
Hi, Nia.
Hello, Marianne.
Must
How are
be
you?
Friday, and I want to really talk about alcohol. And I
Good,
think
good
we've
topic
both,
for a Friday.
yeah, I think we've both sort of always been on the same page about alcohol, as in, you know, the odd social glass of whatever, and we've never really thought too much.
You drink less than I do now, but neither of us have ever really been heavy drinkers,
Well,
really.
I've had a little twirl with habitual drinking, so I sort of understand how you get into that. So we'll talk more about that later. But
Okay.
I think alcohol is a really funny subject because um, in my mind, I've always accepted that obviously there's addictive problems for some people with alcohol. It's a
Yeah.
whole different ball game.
Hmm.
And there are lots of people who maybe binge drink, and that's different.
Yeah.
But for those of us who indulge in the odd glass of whatever, I've always thought I might even have been sold on the benefits. And I think you and I both expounded on, the polyphenols in a glass of red wine,
Yeah. Yeah. I
as
mean
if
that
that's
evidence though, I must say that evidence is slightly on shaky ground.
yeah. Well, when you look at where you get polyphenols in your diet,
Yeah.
and you look at the milligrams, I just had a little look, and you think, well, you actually could eat a beetroot. Really, you don't need a glass of red wine.
Yeah, I know, but the
So
beetroot
that's
doesn't
quite
make
interesting.
the
Okay.
beetroot doesn't make you feel quite the same way, does it?
No, you could, yeah, beetroot before dinner. But anyway,
Anyway.
um, I think doing the research has been really interesting because I've got a brain that tends to pendulum swing between one end and the other, and yours is so
Mm,
much better down the middle because you bring me back to some sort of, proper middle ground. But I'm really bewildered by the fact that we don't see the parallels between this drug that is
yeah.
sold as readily a recreational drug for the whole nation, except
Mm.
if you're under 18, then you've got to get your friend to buy it. It just seems weird to me.
And that's not got any polyphenols in it, has it? Because it's gonna be that
No,
sharp.
most alcohol, by the way, doesn't have polyphenols. We're only talking about some red wines. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but what I did find out, yeah, is that,
Mm,
and you'll like this because you're a scientist, is that it's basically a neurotoxin. And when you
yes.
think about neurotoxins and the effects of alcohol, it makes complete sense. So
Mm.
basically, you poison yourself, but at a dose
Lovely.
related sort of, in a dose related way. So it'd be like
So
taking some
slowly.
sort of, yeah, it's like taking a touch of something
Yeah.
um, for
Bit
the
like
sort of,
Botox, isn't it? When you Botox your
yeah,
wrinkles, you are poisoning yourself, just a tiny dose to stop yourself
yes.
from looking.
I can see many parallels in this. Anyway, um, and it is though a drug. It's a neurotoxin, and
Absolutely.
it
Yeah.
increases hugely your risks of a lot of cancers and chronic diseases.
Hmm.
It has addictive qualities, that's for sure, which
Yeah.
ruin lots of people's lives.
Mm.
And then the side effects are dose related. So it's fine to get a bit tiddly. We all know that. It's quite fun. But then that dose related bit comes in. And
Yeah.
when you suffer from what, let's call it alcohol poison, we've probably all been there, where we've overdone it and we feel
Yeah.
terrible. We might
Mm.
throw up, we might even pass out. This is a serious poisoning
Problem. Yeah.
with a neurotoxin. But
Mm.
then somehow we're allowed to, or encouraged to, pop it in our trolleys in the supermarket to have with dinner. And I'm sort of slightly bewildered by all this.
Well, it is a bit weird, isn't it? I mean, it's a socially acceptable poison
Yeah.
that that we sort of encourage people to start using when they come of age. which is
Yeah.
mad in itself.
Yeah.
It's a part of a celebration, so it's almost frowned upon if it's not
Almost
available
every celebration.
of every celebration. Yeah,
Yeah.
but we know that it can have absolutely catastrophic effects on some people's lives, and also on their health. You and I have both seen people who have
Mm,
suffered greatly from alcohol addiction
mm.
to the point where their
Well,
lives are destroyed and their health is
yeah,
destroyed.
and they
So
lose their lives. Yeah.
yeah, so absolutely, it's a huge thing, and I think I've always been okay with it in moderation,
Yeah.
and I've
Whatever
had
that
periods
is.
in my life when I haven't drunk at all. So when I was pregnant,
Mm,
didn't drink at all,
mm.
and then when I started being able to have alcohol again, my tolerance completely was
Yeah.
down because I'd had that year or
Yeah.
so of not drinking
So your liver makes an enzyme, and by the way, in some people they don't actually have the enzyme, so they're completely intolerant of
of
alcohol.
alcohol. Ah,
They,
yes,
in some ways, they're the lucky ones, but let's not expound that. But
that's like the
you're
Japanese, isn't it? It's
so
genetically they don't have the enzyme to break
yeah,
down
yeah.
alcohol,
So
and
they
so they get
basically get
yeah,
terribly drunk and feel dreadful, which puts them off, of course. But
of course,
um, for the rest of us, if we have an occasional drink, we'll get tipsy much quicker. So we'll feel the effects of that alcohol in the
go much
brain
quicker. Yeah,
much quicker than somebody who's got is regularly drinking alcohol,
drinking. Yeah,
because your clever liver that protects you from toxins has got an enzyme ready waiting for your nightly tipple. So
yeah,
people get what they call an immunity. So they don't ever feel the sort of, tiddly effects.
yeah,
It's more that they just enjoy a certain amount of alcohol every
yeah,
night,
and
and their body
and I
deals with it.
yeah, and I absolutely get that some people really enjoy a
Mm,
drink, and
mm,
to a certain extent, as I've got older, I wouldn't necessarily drink what I used to. So when we were younger and it was all alka pops, and it was almost like lemonade, really, and that's how you
yeah.
kind of get
It
into
was
drinking.
made
Because I
to
doubt,
taste like
yeah,
pop.
I doubt anybody drinks alcohol for the first time and goes, "Oh, isn't that yummy?" Because it doesn't. It
Mm.
doesn't taste nice. But
No,
I
I
think
remember drinking my first gin and tonic and thinking, "This is terrible."
yes, I remember that too.
But I got past
Um,
that.
Yes, it's funny. 'Cause it's like cigarettes. The first cigarette makes you feel sick and throw up, so I'm told. I have, in more latter years, decided that if I'm going to drink, it's got to be worth the drink. So it's got to be the more expensive red wine or champagne that's actually really nice tasting and worth having a drink with. So, are there are there any benefits at all?
Well, I think I probably would have sold you a few originally, but I've just decided that there aren't. Um,
Okay.
I think the short answer is no. And when I was looking at it all, I saw the parallels with smoking. They're so sort of clear, really. And
Mm,
you see how it works. So the industry and the government who make revenues from these things have a vested interest in pushing the sales of these substances. And it's hard to believe, really,
yeah.
when you look back at the tobacco industry, right? That we were sold, I mean, not in your time, but more in mine, we were definitely sold the benefits of smoking.
Yeah.
So I remember smoking being sold as a stress reliever, a
Mm.
weight manager. It helped digestive regularity.
Ew. Wow.
People were told to smoke in the morning so they could cough, and I just think, looking back, I remember pregnant mothers in my era smoking
Yeah.
to encourage smaller babies because they thought they might be easier to birth.
Ooh,
Yes, that is so.
mad.
Anyway,
Are
it's
they?
hard to believe.
Are they
Bizarre.
easier as you are
No,
an ex no.
no, no.
I was
As
gonna
a
say,
midwife,
as an ex-midwife,
as
can you tell me that?
yeah, no, no. You learn
Ah.
it's definitely not easier to birth
I
smaller
mean, I had
babies.
small
Okay.
babies, but they came out through the sunroof, so I have no idea whether they would have been easier or
Yeah, they aren't.
Okay.
It's probably harder through the sunroof, mind you. But I
Yeah.
do remember being told, on the whole, when you said, "But surely so many people getting ill from the effects of smoking." Um, but I was always told that the tax revenues would outweigh any problem with resource use. So, in other words, they were saying quite blatantly that
Yes.
people could harm themselves,
Yes.
and that it was offset by the tax that they were making from this.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
So
So
is
what
this the
basically
same with alcohol?
So basically, it's okay because we're making enough money from the tax
Yeah,
to treat the people in the NHS
yeah,
from the liver-related problems that they've got
yeah,
from the alcohol. That's mad.
yeah.
Okay, so
And not only is it mad, I think it's immoral myself that
yeah,
you then blame the individual. So
individual.
we like doing this in our culture, don't we? We say we've made all this terrible ultra processed food that is obviously fueling obesity to an extent. But we're now going to blame the people because they have a choice. Coca-Cola have told us
Oh,
that, haven't they?
this is all the nanny state business that a lot
Yeah.
of people say. Well, you
Yeah,
can't
you
tell
can
people
choose to
not to
drink
choose.
or eat whatever
Yeah,
you like.
you
So
well, of course
don't
you can at a base level. Yes, of course you can. But if you don't know how to make the best choice and you're not
or
got the
the
information,
socioeconomics, come
or
in
you're
and
not
people's
able to,
choices
yeah,
are
are
yeah,
limited.
okay.
Yeah, okay,
So
that's
is
not good.
alcohol different? And you remember the blue zones that people often had a tipple in the blue zones every night. So
Yeah,
that
so
was another
especially
little
in what is
thing
it
that's
in Sardinia, they drink the red wine, don't they?
it stuck in my head, that there were probably benefits. Why is it different? So when I grew up, long time ago, obviously, having a drink before dinner was part of a civilized society, and it was aspirational in a sense. So
Mm.
people who could have a drink before dinner were in a different socioeconomic sector to people who couldn't afford it because it was pretty expensive alcohol. If you couldn't drink, you were probably not going to buy alcohol. So there
Well,
was that sort
yeah.
of
So there were people.
aspirational thing.
Yeah, so I suppose it's sort of differentiated. We know in England or in Britain we love a class system, don't we? So if you were wealthy enough, you would dress for
Yes,
dinner, you would have a cocktail or an
yes,
aperitif for
yeah,
dinner.
yeah,
Okay, and that was part of being the upper and middle class. And then
yeah,
if you were poor, then you wouldn't have a drink before dinner, but you'd be at the pub on the way home from your
yeah.
manual
So there
job
was
or
the pub
whatever.
culture too. So pubs were
Yeah.
huge community hubs. There was a
Yeah.
huge culture when I first came to this country, which is sort of 45 years ago now, of people meeting for a drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's quite interesting.
And I find it
Um,
interesting that in other countries, actually, they are more likely to meet for coffee, or tea, especially in some Asian countries, especially, I suppose, possibly because they aren't able to tolerate alcohol
mm,
in the same way,
mm.
because they lack this enzyme. So,
So we grew
yeah,
up in an
different culture.
alcohol-fueled world, whether it was social or whether it was socioeconomic or
It's
whatever.
kind of expected,
Yeah,
isn't it, in most
yeah,
cases, that you'll have a
okay.
drink at some point in most celebratory or
Yeah, and
social
almost every
situations.
social occasion you've been to recently,
Yeah,
it's been alcohol-fueled,
available.
hasn't it?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, it's not necessarily that I've drunk at every social occasion that I've been to, but it has been available
Yeah,
should I have
yeah,
wanted to.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, Once I'd got over the sort of terrible toxic effects, so having grown up, thinking alcohol was probably beneficial and some sort of health drink people had before dinner, I
Yeah.
poisoned myself like we all did, and then woke up to the fact that actually it might be dose related and not altogether good for you.
Mm.
But once I'd learned to drink in moderation and avoided that sort of watershed, I could get a bit tipsy, and I thought I was probably more interesting if I was tipsy. So there was like a social lubrication that was part
Yeah.
of this culture. So you had a drink, and then you got a bit more, loose tongued, and managed to flirt with somebody easier than if you hadn't had a drink, right? So that was part of it.
For those of us
And
who are as socially awkward as me, I don't think that made any difference.
no, oh, definitely made a difference to me. But then I went on, interestingly, as a mother of young children, when it
Mm.
became, I remember when it became available in supermarkets. So it was somewhere along that time where it became really readily available. Because you used to have to go to a specialist shop, like the tobacconist. You had to go to
Yeah.
the bottle store, we call them.
Oh,
I don't know what you call them here, but
what, the off license?
the off license, the off license, where does that come from?
I
Anyway, no,
mean, I
another
would love to
podcast.
know the origin of what
Yeah,
that
let's.
means.
But then you went to the local supermarket for your grocery shopping, and it got very cheap because they removed some of the tax. I think I can't remember why it got so cheap, but we started, those of us who are affluent enough, we
Yeah.
started to shove a
Just shove a
bottle or
bottle
two
in.
in
Yeah.
our grocery shop, and that started me, interestingly, me, drinking alcohol every night when I made the dinner. And I had
Mm.
a particularly stressful job, worked really long days, had 4 children, you know the story. And I became an habitual drinker of wine that was in my fridge door. And you don't want to leave it too long, between opening the bottle and
Drinking it.
drinking it. So I would probably, in the end, have been drinking half a bottle a night,
Mm.
and didn't think too much of it. So
Mm.
I became a habitual drinker quite by chance. I didn't ever set out to be. I didn't actually think too much of it until some years later when I had some ill health problems and I was set up on a elimination diet and gave it up
Yeah.
for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And the effects were so dramatic, and it wasn't only the alcohol, it was a lot of other things. But the effects were so dramatic, I
Went
never
back.
went back to
Yeah.
habitual drinking. And so I'm very grateful for all of that because I think I probably would have still been habitually drinking. And there's
Yeah.
nothing madly wrong with that, except that when I was then nursing, obviously, and I was giving people advice about alcohol in my surgery. And
Yeah.
I never really looked at the mils in my glass for quite a long time. But when I did, I realized I was actually drinking 4 units a night, which was 28 units a week, which was definitely more than
Then you should be
there
having a month.
was.
So it's
Yeah,
fascinating, isn't it? 'Cause I remember when we learnt about how to take patient
yeah,
histories, and they always say that whatever the patient tells you is their
double
alcohol
it.
units a week, double it. One of the ways that you can help yourself if you do think that you drink a bit too much, is to get yourself a measure, because actually just a week
Yeah,
of learning how much you're actually drinking is a big eye opener, I think.
exactly.
And I
Exactly what
remember when
happened to
you
me.
used to go to the pub and they would give you what I would say is a very old-fashioned wine glass now, right? You know,
Yes,
the very round ones. They're quite small.
yes,
That was a small glass of red wine.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden we had this sort of boom in like big
Mhm.
bowl-shaped glasses and very different kind of shapes for different wines. And it almost looked like you weren't getting very much wine because it would
Mm,
only fill up
because it
that
was
tiny bit
one.
at the bottom.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
125 mils, I remember, because 125 mils, if you put that in a mug,
Mm.
is half a mug.
Mm.
I mean, it's half a cup. It's small. So
It's
if
small.
you
Yeah.
normal people who pour wine at home will be pouring
Yeah.
250 probably.
Yeah, and you're quite generous, aren't you? So you just kind of slosh it
So
in, and if there's a bit left in the
yeah,
bottle, then you put the rest in, and then you chug it out the bottle. To finish it up. You don't leave it. So I think most people wouldn't
yeah.
realise how much they're actually
And I
having.
think I wasn't alone in this culture of using wine as a stress reliever. And I wouldn't
Oh
have
no, not at
ever
all.
said that was what I used it for originally, but it is what I landed up using it for.
Yeah.
So, and there's a whole lot of other things that come with that, like weight issues.
Mm.
It's an aperitif, as they say, that you tend to eat differently if you drink wine.
Mm.
There's lots of interesting stuff.
I mean,
Okay.
interestingly, for some people who have lost their appetite, it is used as an appetite stimulant,
Yeah.
isn't it? So,
Yeah, we
so
used to
there are,
prescribe it in hospitals.
yeah.
Oh
Oh
god.
yeah, we used to keep it in the
Yeah.
controlled drugs cupboard.
Get a sherry.
Anyway,
Get a sherry in that old lady and then she'll eat.
yes.
Okay. So have
So
things changed recently?
I
Is there a
think they
change in
have.
culture?
I think there is. So I recently
Okay.
read an article about the generation that are younger than me, who are not drinking, and certainly friends that I have who are of that generation. A lot of them have said to me, "I don't drink." It's interesting. Another sort of shift there, and this is a totally different subject, but a lot of more of them are vaping and smoking
Yeah.
than ever before. But that's another conversation.
Yeah,
But they don't drink,
that's
and they
another
have,
rather depressing conversation.
yeah. But interestingly, they've never drunk. They're not interested in drinking.
Well, I looked up the figures. So most of the heavy drinkers are in the boomers age bracket, which is mine, which is 55 to 75. The
Yep.
silent generation, which I thought was a lovely term, are those born before 1946, and they generally drink less. And then
Okay.
the lovely millennials, which is sort of you,
Me.
and the Generation Z below, they seem to be a bit cleverer than us. And there's a real move to think about alcohol differently. And now 25% of that that lot are teetotal, and that 25% seems to be growing. So I think what's happening is there's a culture appearing where it's almost trendy
not to
to not
drink.
drink, and
See,
that's
and this,
very different.
yeah, but I would also say that in sort of contrast to that, there is the young parents where it's almost encouraged or expected that you drink to deal with the fact that you have children and it's
Okay.
stressful.
Yeah.
So there's so many sort of memes and social, reels on Instagram and things that you get sent that, like, I've got a toddler, therefore I drink wine, or um, you know,
Yeah,
all of
that you
that kind
have
of
to have
thing.
wine to tolerate the toddler. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
which is so
I'd
I'm
say
not
that's probably
sure.
true myself, but
Yeah, what the depends what kind of toddler you've
having
got.
quite a few had a few toddlers,
Yeah, but
but
it's
it's the way we live with toddlers in nuclear
yeah.
families,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
of that.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much more to that than
Yeah.
just that. But I
Yeah.
think that's an interesting
Yeah,
social phenomenon.
absolutely.
There's much, much more non-alcoholic
Yeah,
options available. So when I was younger, if
exactly.
you wanted a non-alcoholic option, you had basically lemonade, you had Coke,
Orange juice. Yeah.
orange juice.
Yeah. And
Yeah, and
water was considered
if
very
you asked
odd.
for water, you were basically an alien.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's not that long ago. But
no.
I sort of
And
wonder if your younger generation looked at the older generation and like a lot of these things and thought it doesn't look great to drink like this because look at all the ill health, look at the addiction. I mean,
mm,
what is it that this older generation finds so attractive about
about
alcohol? I
drinking.
almost think it's a bit like perms,
Oh,
Vesta curries, and smoking. That
what's a
people look
Vesta
up and go,
curry?
don't you remember Vesta curries? Oh dear.
No.
They were sort
Sorry
of
if I showed my age there.
dehydrated curries that, yeah, they were
Oh,
really bad. But
yuck.
everyone in my generation will know what a Vesta curry is.
I'm going to look that up now. I've
Anyway,
never heard of that.
yeah, no. But I do think sometimes, younger generations look and think, actually, we're not going to do that. It doesn't look that much
Mm,
fun. And I know
yeah.
even in with my own children who were sort of almost uh, 6 years apart. Um, I think they looked at their older siblings and thought, falling down the stairs and vomiting in the roses didn't look that much fun, actually. So even in that small time, there was
Mm,
a slight
mm,
change in culture. Not to say they
yeah.
didn't drink, but I think they drank less, and they certainly dyed their hair less. So I think there was definitely things where they looked and thought, this doesn't look that fun.
Yeah, so what
And
I find interesting now is that there is obviously many, many more options available to you, right, about
yeah,
these non-alcoholic
yeah,
things.
yeah.
But weirdly, in a world now that has so much more knowledge about ultra processed food and about sugar and about sweeteners, there is a lot of
Yeah.
very expensive as well, which is
Yeah,
one of my
really
other bugbears. Like,
expensive.
so I looked in.
Yeah.
My sister and I were talking about this one day, and I said, "Oh, have you heard about this gin that's not gin?
Yeah.
That's like got all these
The
botanicals in it,
aromatics and
the
stuff.
aromatics,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
looks delicious, but it is as expensive as
Yeah.
gin. And how is this even possible? Because you're not paying any
Yeah.
alcohol tax. I don't get it.
Well, that's because someone saw a gap in the market, yeah, with the things we never
Oh,
see. But that there was their whole company is making a lot of money, and also the alcohol companies are also making money in that direction because they're not stupid. They've seen the trends. So a
yeah.
bit like the no sugar, the zero sugar stuff that came out with fizzy drink companies who've now bought up natural fruit juice companies that are now buying up fizzy water companies.
Hmm.
There's this domino effect, and I think the non-alcoholic market is growing hugely. We had as you know, had a family wedding recently, and what was interesting was a lot of attention was paid to
Mm.
giving non-alcoholics choices. So we had elderflower champagne, we had cordials, we had non-secco. Who knew that was a
Oh
thing?
yeah, no
And
secco. Yeah.
even non-alcoholic cocktails. And what was also interesting, we had very nice teas in vintage teacups. Isn't that funny?
Mm.
And
Mm.
people were using them as toasts. That sort of intrigued me.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
old style, everyone had to have champagne to toast, didn't they? Or some sort of fizz.
Yeah, yeah,
But
but now not so
this
much.
generation were happily swigging on their vintage cups of tea. So I thought this is really There's definitely a trend.
There is, and I think the trouble was as well, not that many years ago actually, non-alcoholic beer just didn't hit the
It
spot.
was
It just there
awful.
wasn't it was awful.
It's got
Um,
better.
it has got better. So, but
Mhm.
again, I think it depends on what you buy.
Mm.
And it's just really interesting because I don't necessarily want to drink squash. Well, I don't drink squash.
No,
I don't like squash. I'm
no,
not too keen on having a big glass of orange juice. I find it far too sweet
no,
and too much in
terrible.
one go.
Yeah.
I really like some of the drinks that an alcoholic drink that you can have is actually very refreshing and sometimes a
Mm,
bit bitter, which is what you need and not quite so
mm.
sweet. So I would prefer in some cases to drink that rather than an orange juice, even though it's got the
Oh,
neurotoxin in it.
absolutely. Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of interested in all these
Mm.
uh, non-alcoholic
Well, it's still a
things, but
treat, isn't it?
I cannot
Mm.
get, unfortunately, my wallet into the right place where I think I'm gonna spend 22
Yeah.
pounds on something that isn't made of
But if
anything.
you
Like, it's
were
not. It's
but if
mad.
you were keen not to drink alcohol and you still wanted that treat,
Mm,
having the aromatics or whatever with I don't know, fizzy water and cucumber is still a bit of a treat. So I think there
mm.
are pluses to having
I'm
that
just gonna have to work out
non-alcoholic
how to
choice.
make it myself for cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of them are distilled and everything, they just don't have the alcohol.
Well, I mean, I
Um,
could put a distillery in the back garden.
you could.
I
That
mean,
might be
why
you
not?
might make more money that way.
Mm,
But what about what about the social pressures? So we've always talked about social pressures around alcohol,
mm,
and I think what you're saying is that in your generation there's slightly less, and maybe in the generation below they really are lesser still. But my generation, I don't think that's really entirely true. I've always found them to be there,
mm,
and my other half doesn't really drink much.
mm.
Neither do I. But we still find socializing. So if we have people to supper and they come with a bottle of something, which means they have an expectation, presumably. So we've taken bottles to people recently. So then there's that expectation, isn't there? If you're taking this gift of a bottle of alcohol, that you will be offered some
Drinking it with
alcohol.
them. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or even if you're not drinking that bottle, you'll be offered a drink. So we offer people a drink with supper and or even before, and they accept. And then how does it work if you're saying, actually, we don't drink, but we're going to give you some alcohol, but
So,
we don't
like,
actually do it?
so this is the thing, isn't it? So you were telling me that before I was born, everybody was a smoker, and so it was
Yeah.
rare that you weren't a smoker. But
Yeah.
say that your household wasn't smokers at all, and you went
Yeah.
round. You wouldn't. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't go round to someone's house with a packet of cigarettes. I think that's a bit random.
No,
But
it wouldn't be a gift. Well, it might, I suppose,
well,
if they
I
were
don't
smokers,
suppose if
but
you've been to
generally,
the
yeah. Yeah.
um, but I think, if someone came to my house and they said, "Oh, can I have a cigarette?" I would say, "I'd prefer if you went in the garden."
So would you do that with
But
alcohol
I can't
eventually?
see
Would you
that I would
say,
say to someone, "Can I have a glass of wine?" "Yeah, could
"Can
you
you
just
have a
go in the
drink in the
garden?"
hedge?" Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I think the parallels are definitely there, but I
Yeah.
find myself that when I'm serving alcohol in my house, that it's part of that hosting thing, and if
Mm,
people you don't want to make a moral judgment or seem to be disapproving of somebody's pleasures, and maybe they only have the occasional glass, who am I to say they
that they
can't do it
can't
at my
yeah.
supper table? So
And it's
but what
very
happens to
wrapped up
me
in
is I drink
yeah.
some too, and I
Yes,
know that
yeah.
actually it's not my choice.
See, and that's the thing. When you're pregnant, it's the best excuse in the world because
Yeah.
you can just go, "Oh, well, I'll pour you a glass of wine. I'm terribly sorry. Can't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
one."
yeah, yeah.
Or
But I
when I'm
can't be pregnant
driving,
near. It's
I'd
really gone past its sell-by date.
I know. Sorry.
The antibiotic use, that was another one.
Oh,
People said
yeah.
they were on antibiotics, but I mean,
There's
how
only
often can you
actually
be on antibiotics?
well, quite, and there's only actually one that you need to be that careful with, really.
Exactly. There's no drink January. What do they call it?
Dry January.
Dry January.
Yeah.
And the
No
number
drink
of
January.
people I've heard who are counting down the days on a calendar for dry January, and they've
So that
got a
they can drink
special
again.
bottle of something to open on the
Yeah.
1st of February. And I
Yeah.
think, how does this actually benefit anybody? I can't imagine. So,
No, it's kind of like it kind of glamorizes it even more because it's an
yes,
incentive, it's a
yes,
reward for being
yeah.
sober for
So
30
you're giving
days.
up something really nice,
Yeah.
and then you're waiting to get back on it. So, I mean, there are parallels there for a lot of things, aren't there?
Yeah, I completely understand your viewpoint that you don't want to drink and that it's a neurotoxin and that you're really
Yeah,
unhappy with
that's
drinking.
my bottom line now.
And that's your bottom line. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I would say I'm still on my journey towards that, in that I'm quite happy to have a glass of wine
yeah,
occasionally, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm going to be teetotal. But what I have decided I would prefer to do is find a way of getting a softer drink that has some of
mm,
the
mm,
taste profiles, I would put it, maybe, of the drinks that I
yeah,
do like without the alcohol, because I don't need the alcohol. Um, it doesn't make me feel good. And also,
yeah.
I've got to be honest, I mean, not that I drink to the point where I feel unwell the next morning, but I really don't
But
like
it
having to
might
get up in
make
the
you
middle of the
sleep
night to go to the
slightly
loo.
less. You know, you might sleep not quite as well after a drink.
Well, absolutely, yes. And also, I just think it's not entirely necessary. I don't really need it. And so, what's the point? But I also cannot understand paying for cucumber water,
Yeah,
so I'm going to
yeah,
have to do some research. And yesterday, I got a fruit tea and I made it like a really concentrated fruit tea, and then I put it in the fridge and had it as a cold soft drink, and it
yeah.
was delicious. It was
Well, there
delicious,
you go.
actually.
So that might be
So,
because they haven't got any sugars in.
but I reckon if I put that in my soda stream, gave it a little fizz,
Yeah,
squeezed a little
and
bit of
had it
lime,
as a treat.
had a ginger thing in it, actually, I'd feel really virtuous and almost that would be like my drink of choice, and I don't mind having to
Mm,
put the effort in to make that
mm.
because I know that it's nice. As it's
Well,
funny, isn't it?
that reminds me of apple cider vinegar, of course, which I've got quite hooked on. So apple cider vinegar
Yeah,
into fizzy water. So there are alternatives, but would we ever say, um, like we used to, that there are benefits to drinking alcohol? I suppose that's where I've got to. Not to say
yeah.
that you can't have the occasional glass of whatever. There's not a problem, and there's not really a health issue for that.
No, I
But
think we need to remember that a lot of our drinking culture came as well from the fact that water wasn't safe to drink. Um, I mean, you have to
that's
remember
a long
that
way back.
a long
Yeah,
way back, but
yeah,
this is obviously in our culture, in our history,
yeah,
that in certain parts of London, if you drank from the waters, you'd get cholera.
yeah. Sure, you
So,
died.
so it was
Yeah,
actually better for your health to drink gin, which is insane.
but if you said, oh well, I have a glass of red wine every night because I need my polyphenols. I
No,
think you're conning yourself
I think you are.
slightly.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a little bit like saying, have an opioid because it might be good for your skin. It's like it's like
It's
very
mad.
weird to me now when
Yeah,
I think
no.
about it. I think,
Yeah, no, I
what
don't
are
think
we
that's right.
saying? We're saying one glass of red wine will give you I don't know how many milligrams. It's not that many of polyphenols, and only if you get wines
Mm.
differ. But I
I think we
think
have
this is
to
a
get
terrible
yeah,
sell, isn't it?
we have to culturally move away from the fact that we need alcohol in order to be able to
Mm,
enjoy ourselves
mm, and
and
celebrate. Yeah,
celebrate. And we perhaps need to be more willing to consider other options. And the other thing is that we also have to consider what those other options are. So I had someone gave me a book once about loads of non-alcoholic options, but all of them had a sugar syrup like a
yeah.
cocktail in them. I was like, I don't want
Yeah,
that.
I like a lemon cordial myself that I've made, but with a bit of mint in it. But I'm
Mm,
drinking the sugar ready. But I'm drinking the sugar with alcohol too. I
of
mean that
course,
is
yeah. I mean,
part
yeah.
of
It just
the
depends how much you're
attraction.
having. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'd rather, um, yeah. I think it depends on your attitude to how you're
yeah.
feeling and your overall health. But in
And
terms of
why
why
you're
you're
using
drinking, what are you
alcohol?
drinking for?
But it
Yeah,
is a drug, and
yeah.
it
Like
has
anything else.
harmful effects, and it's dose related, and it's a
Yeah,
neurotoxin, all those things, and it's a risk factor for things. But the odd glass of celebratory alcohol is not an
going to
issue. The
kill you.
same as the odd bit of, I don't know, celebratory pudding or chocolate or cake, or none of it
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
problem in small amounts. But I think to sell this as a health a health product is going a bit. So
Bit too far. Yeah.
I'm pretty convinced that it's not, and that at Seren we would say, be careful of thinking that it is that there
Yeah,
are
don't
health
don't be
benefits.
hoodwinked into thinking that
Yeah,
just because you're
yeah,
drinking a glass of red wine, actually you're having
yeah,
a health drink. And interestingly, Marianne, this is really amusing. So the studies that said that red wine is good for
yeah,
you and has
yeah.
polyphenols and all that,
Who were
they
they
were
done by?
they were done by the French, and
Oh, the
they were
French.
only done on French wine. So actually,
Oh,
if you're drinking Argentinian red wine or Australian red wine,
yeah,
then
yeah.
you may not be getting the health benefits.
Oh, I see. So you've got to drink French red wine. I see how this
Yeah.
works. So
I think
I'm
this was all
all
to
I'm
encourage
so
French tourism.
cynical. Yes, I'm so cynical. But I would say it's done a lot of people a lot of harm. Alcohol's
Yeah.
been around a long time. Could you see a future for a culture where there wasn't a lot of alcohol? I suspect it will get less actually, but will there be something else? Will they be giving out some recreational drug at dinner parties? I mean, we're talking about magic mushrooms at the moment, which is
Mushroom
obviously
teas and
getting.
coffees and all. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
will there
interesting.
always be a little recreational something? I don't know.
I think they're possibly, using
Mm,
history as a way of predicting
yeah.
the future. I think that that's human nature. I think people will always want something for a
Yeah,
distraction
to
or
make
a
life slightly easier
easier
or
or
to
an
be
anesthetic,
convivial with,
Mm,
the social
yeah.
connections. The pub was a huge social connector. So
Yeah, yeah.
the fact is, coffee shops are. Oh, we could talk about coffee, but that's another podcast. But anyway,
You are
don't be
not going to
hoodwinked.
convince me to give that up, I'm
Give up
afraid.
coffee. Of course, there are minor benefits to the neurotoxin in a glass, but I wouldn't be hoodwinked into thinking this
Yeah.
is actually a
Good for
health
you.
product. That's my bottom line.
I think that's a good bottom line.
Yeah.
Right.
Talk soon.
Talk soon. See you soon. Bye.
See you then. Bye.